One other question is, if you didn't need more trouble right now, the Washington Post reports this morning that while the State Department was telling countries around the world, thanks so much for your help on Katrina, that in fact we weren't collecting it. Almost none of it was collected through bureaucratic red tape and incompetence, that we never got the money.
No, in fact, what happened, Bob, is that we were grateful for what people were offering. It was frankly a new circumstance for the United States to be flooded with offers of foreign assistance.
So that story's false.
No, Bob, the United States was very grateful for what we've done. We did tell some people we couldn't use certain kinds of in-kind contributions. We told people that it might be more efficient to help the Bush-Clinton private effort or the Red Cross, and many of those, much of that assistance was used, including, for instance, money that has gone to help historically black colleges in Louisiana and Mississippi, as well as libraries in those states.
So, as far as you're concerned, it was handled properly. You don't have a problem.
It was a new circumstance, and I would be the last to say that everything was handled perfectly. But we were very grateful for what countries had done, and to the degree that they delivered on their pledges, I think those pledges were well used.
One final question. You said earlier this morning you're going to this conference on Iraq.
Yes.
People from Iran will be there. Will you meet with representatives from Iran?
I would not rule it out. We will be there not to talk about U.S.-Iranian issues, but to talk about Iraq and how Iraq's neighbors can help to stabilize Iraq, and I won't rule it out.
But would you also not rule out that you might talk to Iran about its nuclear program?
The proper channel for Iran's nuclear program is through Javier Solana, the EU High Representative, who is representing all of the 6 countries that have made Iran a very generous offer concerning the development of civil nuclear power.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Now, we taped that interview. It was unedited about an hour ago for reaction. We turn now to Congressman John Murtha, who's sitting in the same seat. He is the chairman of the House Defense Appropriations Subcommittee, one of the original members of Congress to say we need to begin withdrawing the troops. Congressman, your reaction to what the Secretary said.
Well, the problem we've had right along, Bob, has been overly optimism about this whole invasion of Iraq. The fact that the weapons of mass destruction weren't there, her response that Tenet said this or said that. He doesn't set policy. All he does is tell the objective analysis of what they should look for. They make the decision about whether they're going to go to war or not. They've been blaming everybody for everything. I'm concerned that they continue to do that. I'm concerned that they don't accept any responsibility themselves. They even blamed Clinton for a while. Then they blamed the Democrats. The Republicans were in control of Congress as well as the White House at the same time. And now we hear the Secretary of State saying, well, we're maybe going to meet with the Iranians. We had no responsibility here. George Tenet didn't tell us about that. Dave Obey yesterday, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, said to me yesterday in Wisconsin, he said, let me tell you, I remember George Tenet saying to us that they have weapons of mass destruction. And I believe George believed that. But he also said he didn't think the Iraqis would use the weapons of mass destruction unless we attacked them. Now, that was right before we voted on the legislation. But I'm concerned that this administration has intimidated the military. They've intimidated all the people that work for them, and they aren't willing to speak out. It's almost as if they all have talking points, and we go in and say what the administration wants them to say.
Well, they also have a talking point that says members of Congress, people here in Washington, ought to not be trying to run the war and trying to take the job away from the generals. How do you respond to that, Congressman?
Well, we have a responsibility under the Constitution to pay for a war. We also have a responsibility to make sure the troops are taken care of. One of the things we said in this legislation, plus the fact we gave him $4 billion more than he asked for all the proposals that needed in this war itself. We fully funded everything he asked for. We also said, look, the troops can't be sent back before they're home for at least a year. They finally decided to do that. That we said you can't extend them. Now, I visited Fort Hood, Fort Bragg, and Fort Stewart. The troops are burned out. They're extending them to 15 months. Bob, I hear rumors in the Pentagon they're going to extend them to 18 months. They're not going to be able to sustain these deployments. So they're violating every guideline that the military has. Now, look at the benchmarks which you mentioned to the Secretary of State. The benchmarks The Iraqis agreed to it. The president agreed to it. We're saying to them, well, let's put some teeth into the benchmarks.
And just for our viewers who might not follow that closely, what you're talking about at benchmarks is that the Iraqis have to show some progress in figuring out a way to share power. They have to figure out some way to share the oil wealth and see that that's equally distributed. They have to rein in these militias. Those are what we're talking about when we're talking about benchmarks. But let me ask you about one other thing, Congressman. The Vice President came down very hard on the Democrats, saying that this legislation, if it has this withdrawal timetable in it, that it's just a recipe for disaster, that it's legislation to announce a surrender. Now, that's pretty tough.
Well, it's tough, Bob, but what's the surrender is in what's hurting the troops. You know, they always bring this back to say it's hurting the troops, is the fact that they're deployed so long, the families are suffering, they never put enough money into it, they never put enough troops into it, they never had the body armor they needed, and oil production is the same level or below level that when we invaded Iraq, electricity production the same way. So all the things they've said have been overly optimistic. Bob, if they don't start to plan for redeployment, they're going to redeploy. If they don't start to plan, they're going to have chaos just like they had when they went into Iraq and didn't plan for the transition to peace.
Now, let's go over that again, because I think that's an important point that you're making, or I'd say alleging, at this point. You're saying that whatever happens, they should start planning for withdrawal now?
I've been saying to the military
what
right
kind
along.
of signal is that?
I've been saying right along, you'd better start to plan for redeployment, because you're going to redeploy. There's the progress that they talk about is not there. Any of the economic things that I've seen doesn't show any progress. We've had 330 people killed since the surge began. More people killed in the last 4 months than were killed any other time during the war. 53% increase in American deaths, and this White House keeps saying we're making progress.
All right, let's just get to the where the rubber hits the road here. Clearly, the president's going to veto this. Right. What are Democrats going to send back to the White House? Will it be a bill that has some kind of conditions? Because in the end, aren't you going to have to fund these troops to keep from putting them in harm's way?
Well, in the first place, we gave the president everything he asked for and then some. We gave him $4 billion more. We gave him for PTSD. We gave him for brain damage, all those kind of things. More money for Walter Reed to take care of those problems. But what if he vetoes this bill? He's cut off the money. But obviously, we're going to pass another bill, and it's going to have some stringent requirements. I'd like to see 2 months. I'd like to look at this again in 2 months later.
Just fund it for 2 months,
fund it for 2 months instead of a year, and then
White House says no.
White House says no, but the White House has said no to everything. They say we're willing to compromise, and then we don't get any compromise. We've compromised on waivers for the requirements for the troops, which is their own requirements, and also goals instead of requirements for the benchmark. So we've already compromised, and we need to make this president understand, Mr. President, the public has spoken. There's 4 ways to influence a president. And one is popular opinion, the election. Third is impeachment, and fourth is the purse.
Are you seriously talking about contemplating an impeachment of this president,
Bob, what I'm saying, there's 4 ways to influence a president.
And that's one of them?
Is impeachment. And
that's an option that is on the table?
I'm just saying that's one way to influence a president. The other way is the purse. And the purse is controlled by the Congress, who's elected by the public. In the last election, public said we want the Democrats in control.
All right. Thank you very much, Congressman. Back in a moment with a little political roundtable in a second.